Hi Flyer fans, Mikos here, one of our favorite places, UD Arena. As today we focus our attention on name, image, and likeness. NIL hit college sports almost like a wave. It's about a year and a half ago, and it's new. We're still trying to understand it. That's why I'm really excited today as we get a chance to maybe bridge that gap in administration to supporters. And just sitting down, talking with the athletic director here at the University of Dayton, and Sullivan, and then the leader of Dayton6th, and that NIL component, and Matt Farrell. Gentlemen, I guess we'll start in sort of looking at the landscape of college sports and what we've seen in this year and a half, and sort of this new, because we're learning, you're learning, and sort of your feelings on the lay of the land. I'll start with you, Neil.
Sure. Yeah, it's been an adventure. This is something the NCAA has talked about for a really long time, and there was a working group that was put together that did a lot of great work. That was going to have some regulations and some guardrails and essentially some rules around what name, image, and likeness would look like. Well, simultaneous to that group concluding their work, the Alston case in the Supreme Court, the NCAA was on the other side of that, and so that group kind of got paused. And that has led to essentially an unregulated marketplace for the most part. There are certainly some rules and there's some regulations, but relative to what we think of NCAA regulations, it's essentially an unregulated market. So that has been something that has been very challenging to adapt to. The University of Dayton takes its obligations of compliance, whether that's with state law, whether that's with NCAA rules, very seriously. So you end up right now across the country, people interpreting rules differently. People have different state laws. I think last I heard there was 38 different states with different laws of name, image, and likeness. So, Dayton had been supportive of name, image, likeness in the right way. Young men and women being able to put their name on the back of a jersey, being able to do a commercial sponsorship. We thought that was long overdue, and the student athletes had earned that. What we didn't necessarily, we haven't been in favor of, and has been a challenge, has been the way that the marketplace has really exploded, really in a pay-for-play. A lot of this is pay-for-play disguised as NIL, and that's probably been something that we didn't anticipate. But I do think we've started to find, with Matt, the help of the communities, others, we've started to find our sweet spot and how to balance all these out. So as it evolves and moves forward, but I would classify the first year and a half as relatively chaotic.
And then Matt, sort of asking that same question, what we've seen across the country, and then more importantly here at the University of Dayton.
Yeah, I think Neil hit on all the high points. I think college basketball, college athletics fans, myself included, were in the same boat as Neil. We were excited for name, image, and likeness in the right way to make its way into college basketball. It was something that I personally was tracking since I was on staff at the University of Dayton. I think it was 2009 when I was on staff, and the Ed O'Bannon case that lawsuit got filed. So it was something I have been aware of and been tracking for over a decade. What I will say is that what's exciting for this community is that we as a community, whether it's businesses, individuals, nonprofits, can engage with student athletes in ways we've never been able to do effectively before. Previously, it was ask for favors and make an ask of a young man or a young woman to do something in their limited free time for no compensation because it wasn't allowed. What we now have the ability to do is compensate them for their time, create real quid pro quo, real value exchange between the two parties. And what we've seen is that our student athletes are remarkable in this community. They're great young men, great young women, great representatives of the university's brand, the athletic department, the coaching staffs, and they're ambassadors of our community, and their touch points into the community have been valuable. So those are all the benefits of name, image, and likeness that we've seen over the first 18 months. And I think the best is still yet to come when it comes to what matters for this community.
Definitely a huge shift, a gigantic impact to college sports. But I find it interesting because we're also at a time with immediate eligibility. And then you throw in the transfer portal. I'm sort of interested, Neil, as an athletic director, did you ever envision something like this happening, and then more importantly, all of it sort of coming together in one piece?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question and a really good observation. At one time in the same period of regulatory change, you have immediate eligibility of transfers in football, men's basketball. I think I read there's over 2,000 football transfers in the portal right now in the sport of football. Basketball gets in the thousands as well. So you have transfers that are transferring, you have them considering their name, image, likeness opportunities, and then you have other deregulation in state laws and things across the country. So it's all coming together at one time. So there used to be more of an environment where you were really focused on recruiting, and your current players, were already in the system and already kind of locked and ready to go on your roster. And now across the country, and we're fortunate at Dayton, our players like to be here, but you have a situation where you've got players on your own team that you're trying to make sure that you're taking care of with how their experience is here, and then you're also worried about 2026, 2025, and what that future class looks like. So any one of those changes alone would have been a really big deal in the NCAA. And then for them to happen at the same time, essentially within 6 to 12 months of each other, has created a lot of stress on the system. And I want to be clear that we support player freedom and movement, and we support name, image, likeness. But this is the first time that they've come together in a relatively unregulated way.
Matt, as the local leader, and I think it's important too to note that you've been here from the get-go in that first agreement with Dayton basketball, and it's relatively new. All of it's we're learning from the start to where we are now. I guess with your own eyes, the good, the bad, and then sort of everything in between.
Yeah, I definitely lean towards way more good. I give both our student athletes and the university a ton of credit for that. Dayton is a place where we're going to do things the right way. And I think that the athletic department and Neil's leadership has been a big part of that. I think the way the university has resourced it appropriately to give the student athletes access to education, access to staff members to help and support them, resources through technology platforms to make the disclosure process easy and seamless for them. All of those things have made it great for the university, and those are the resources that the university has pushed into the student athletes' hands. So I am definitely there's a lot of good here. Back to those first deals, right? I think it's important to remember, one of the individuals who's on the Dayton6th advisory board is a name that the Flyer faithful love, right? And that's Brian Roberts. And Brian came forward early in the NIL processing, even as we knew it was coming to fruition, and says, I want to be part of this. I want to support. And Brian and a group of investors in a local real estate holding company that he owns did the first name, image, likeness deal with the men's basketball team. So it was great to see our student athletes, our former student athletes, giving back and being part of it to kind of get that wave going, to show the community that, hey, our student athletes are open for business. Equally as important, I think it's also remember that days later, a small women-owned business did the first NIL deal with the women's basketball team. And although Dayton6th wasn't a thing in July of 2021, it was the team around Dayton6th that was able to facilitate those early deals. And throughout the probably 15 months that led up to Dayton6th, the legal entity getting created, we were doing a lot of the things that you see us doing today, finding ways to take individuals and businesses and connect them with student athletes. Find creative ways to market and do student athlete marketing for businesses, for individuals, whether they're a birthday party or a basketball clinic or camp, finding ways to connect those folks to student athletes, to bring those student athletes to engage with the youth in our community. We've done all those things and have been part of it. And I think that the piece of NIL that I love the most is it's a great touch point for our student athletes to be more engaged in this community, to have those relationships that, the kid who's cheering for that, pizza And then that Tumani Kamara, Deron Holmes dunk is the same kid who gets a high five that student athlete at their birthday party. It's the same, youth basketball player who's there and aspires to be where those student athletes are, who gets to have Kobe Bryant come to their basketball practice and put them through workouts. Like, that's NIL done right. And that to me is why I'm part of it, and why I want to continue to do what we need to do to help the student athletes, to help the university, but also connect into the community, which is something that I care deeply about.
Throwing a little bit of a curveball, but I want to sort of focus on what I said initially in sort of the bad, and maybe looking outside of what you're hoping of NIL done right.
Yep.
But maybe looking across the country and NIL gone wrong. Is there a situation, and are there examples of ways that you try and steer and navigate in another direction?
Yeah, there is a lot of examples in NIL gone wrong. I have had a lot of touch points to other athletic directors, other donor bases. I still have a lot of friends in the profession, and to hear the horror stories are real. There are coaches and athletic departments who are offering numbers, big numbers, significant six-figure numbers, for student athletes to just sign, a national letter of intent. That is happening. Pay for play. Neil talked about it. It is pay for play disguised as NIL, and that exists. It does. I think it's impossible to ignore that, and that's not the way that I think this community can embrace NIL. I think the way things work best here are doing things the right way, doing it in a way that is repeatable, and therefore it becomes sustainable. So there are horror stories for sure. There is bad. I do think that it is the exception, not the rule, but there are a lot of exceptions.
And just to jump in, I think the way that Dayton can do, we believe the way to recruit with NIL is to take care of the community, to take care of the players that we have now. And so if you're a young man or young woman that you're coming in to sit on an official visit, or you're visiting with our coaching staff, it's a fair question to say, hey, tell me how your current players are doing. And we've got to be able to answer that question, and we got to be able to answer that question truthfully, honestly, but we will not cross the line and say, if you come here, I guarantee you will get this. But what we do is say, let me show you proof of performance. Let me show you, no different than we do how our coaches develop players, how our players go on to do well in the business world after that, because they've got a University of Dayton degree. People want to see that. Have we had people that say, look, I'm not interested in that, just tell me what you're promising me? And we haven't played in that. We're not doing that. We haven't participated in that because it's not sustainable, and frankly, it's not allowed to do that. But we do think that if people support Dayton6th and our events with G3 marketing and the other things that we do, and our current players are taken care of at an elite level in a legitimate way, that just adds to the attractiveness to a young person, a transfer considering coming here, or a high school kid coming here. So I actually don't think we have to participate in some of those games that others are if we take care of the ones that we have.
Matt, you talk about what Dayton6th is about, and also, how student athletes have been a part of it. I guess if you could just go into more detail about those student athletes in action.
Yeah. I think it's important to kind of remember we launched Dayton6th kind of on the eve of the season, and I think it's important for fans to know that student athletes have a lot of commitments academically and athletically, and it's more challenging in season to activate them for sure. We have activated them. Every student athlete has done autographs for the community. We have had engagements on campus where schools have come to campus for field trips, and our student athletes have participated in those field trips with youth from the community. There have also been other examples where we've activated our men's and women's basketball players in some things that are just going to remain private. I'll kind of genericize one example, and that is there was a young man who was going through a very dangerous medical procedure. And a few days before that medical procedure, we kind of set up a Zoom call with him and his family and a handful of the men's basketball players. Our men's basketball players were amazing in that they were engaging. They were kind of remarkably curious throughout the results of that procedure to ensure that the young man that they met recovered well, and he did. So those are the things that we've done throughout the season, which is hard to find that time. But as we look to what the rest of the year will yield, right? Remember, we launched kind of Dayton6th as a kind of school year initiative, kind of culminating, at the end of this school year. So we will definitely do more activations in this community as the success of these teams continues and the season wraps this year.
And it's sort of now shifting, and obviously it is still new, but has there been an example, sort of on your end of a story maybe that you've enjoyed from this NIL experience with student athletes in the community?
Yeah, there's been a lot, and that are, and the best are the human interest stories, and the one story that Matt touched on, and making sure we respect the confidentiality of that family. I was able to watch that, and here's a young kid, junior high school level kid that's going into a procedure that would make any adult, worried. And the amount of empathy that our players indicated, even days later, hey, have you heard anything? How's that going? It's like, that's what Dayton's built on. We're not built on the $100,000 autograph. Hey, sign this and just walk away with this check. Are there places that are able to do that? Sure, but that's just not what Dayton is. And so I think some of the things that we've been able to do, it's really about human interest, right? It's all about relationships. That's what it's built on. And these are exceptional people that you would want to babysit their kids. Every men's women's basketball on our team. My oldest is now 10 years old, so he thinks he can babysit himself. But any one of our players, I would allow in my living room, and my wife and I were gone to watch my kids. And there's not a lot of basketball programs, I think, that can say that. And I say that sincerely, and I say that meaningfully. And that's the best part of NIL in my mind. And I think we can do that, and we can do it as good as any basketball program in the country, just being true to who we are.
Matt, you had this idea of the virtual sellout. And I guess from the beginning and where we are now, how'd that go, or are we still in that process?
Yeah, we're still in that process for sure. We did launch this right before the season, I think in a week prior to the season. We are more than halfway there to that original goal of a sellout through Dayton6th. We have had contributions from over 20 states. So fans, the Flyer faithful is a national thing. That to me is a strong signal that momentum will continue, but we're not all the way there, and we do have work to do, and every student athlete has participated through. Every student athlete we set out to participate has participated.
And I guess I should have started with it, but for folks out there that might not know about the virtual sellout, it sort of entails the amount of seats in this building. Yeah.
I think the goal, as we thought about it, as I've talked to folks in the community, as Neil's probably had more conversations than anybody, the thing that resonated most with our fans is the long-standing tradition of UD Arena that even dates back to the days of the field house on campus. And that is a packed house where our fans are America's most passionate college basketball fans, showing up game in and game out, regardless of the weather, regardless of the opponent. I think we see that theme throughout everything that Dayton basketball stands for, whether that's the NCAA tournament, men's basketball, women's basketball, our fans show up. So what resonated most in the conversations that I had was a conversation around, well, if every season ticket holder just participated, would that do it? And I think the answer is that goes a long way. And that was where we got to the point of, well, What do you get? Well, what you get is what you're paying for is our student athletes to be able to participate in name, image, and likeness. The way you do that is through a ticket. The concept of a ticket is a thank you note signed by a student athlete that is branded as a ticket that everyone receives. Our goal is 13,400 plus tickets sold, and we are more than halfway there.
And I think, Alex, just to jump in there, is I think the beauty of what Dayton6th has been able to do is, there's this notion that name, image, likeness is just for the proverbial car dealer. It's just for the backroom mega booster family that just wants to write, one big check to get one big player. That's not what Dayton's built on. And candidly, that's not what our major donors are built on. Our major donors support us in everything from our facilities of this building, this arena, our coaches' salaries, the way our student athletes travel, the direct support to that. So they're heavily invested in us. But what makes Dayton really tick is everybody, the proverbial Flyer Nation. And I think, for us to get, if everyone can do their part, and many hands make for small work, so to speak, we can continue to invest in all those other things, because I think it's really important that people understand that NIL is a drastic change and it is fundamentally critical. However, it is just one leg of the stool. We still have scholarships. We still have to support our coaching staff. We still have to support our players, their health, their safety, their well-being. We still have to support facilities. So, the pie has to get bigger. We can't just divert dollars from an arena project and say, well, let's just put it all in NIL. The whole experience, now this is part of it. If you were to go back decades, maybe the way that the strength and conditioning might not have been as big a deal back in the 80s as it is now. So we've invested in that. But we didn't take away something else to invest in strength and conditioning. We added strength and conditioning. We added academic support. We added training tables. We added state-of-the-art medical equipment. So I think it's really important that people understand that NIL is now a component to it. It's not the component, and you'll never hear me say that it is, because it's the sum of all the parts. But if everybody participates and everyone were to do something, that helps us get all league players. That helps us get NBA level talent. That helps us get what we need. And I think what Matt has been able to do is that for any dollar level, you can participate. The tickets, I think, are priced at no less than $50. But we'll take the $5 from someone that can do that. We understand there's hardworking people to do that. But if we just look at that as an annual part of an annual support of the program, we can do a lot of stuff with that.
Yeah, real quick, Alex, before you jump in on that, I think Neil made a good point. The way I summarize that in my individual one-on-one conversations with folks is NIL is an and, not or conversation. It has to be and in support of. The entirety of what we Dayton basketball family have had success on over the years is the entire view of a student athlete experience. NIL is but a piece of that.
Neil, you mentioned the components. I always find it interesting how many pieces go into college sports. And trying for myself personally to understand more in name, image, and likeness, at times I almost feel like it's the wild, wild west. And you had mentioned those lines and trying to understand, where is that line? How difficult has it been in trying to deal with compliance? In addition to what you already stated to state laws, NCAA regulations, and et cetera.
It's been a challenge. I think we've been ahead of it. So we try to vet everything that we do. We're maniacal about our documentation. We're maniacal about the information that we get on the deals that our student athletes submit to make sure that it is all above board. I think the frustrating thing for most of us in Division I is sports is built on a common theme, right? So I can't say that it's a par 5 and you say it's a par 3 and us count our scores the same way. Like it's either a par 3 or par 4 or a par 5. And across the country, you've got some people saying, well, that's a par 5, that's a par 3. It's like, well, how can we play then? Unless we're gonna have a handicap system, how are we gonna play? So I think where we have stopped short of what I would call promises and guarantees, it is tough when you're recruiting against what that family perceives as a promise or a guarantee from a competing school that they're going to. So, we have held that line, and I'm not, the university is bigger than all of us, and there's not any one player or the NIL deal that I'm willing to jeopardize for that. So I think that's been the frustrating piece, because sports requires a common set of rules that people participate in. And I think there's been a lot of people that criticisms of people like me that are asking to try to have some regulation, to say, hey, let the kids get whatever they want. Like they don't need a regulated market, just let it happen. And my retort to that is, what sports league in the world is successful without some level of regulation? My son's Little League team has more regulation on name, image, likeness than Division I basketball right now. And that's not to limit what young people can earn. I'm all for them earning whatever they can. But if we're going to compete together for one trophy, one Atlantic 10 championship, one NCAA championship, we have to have a common understanding of what the rules are. And I think that's the frustrating piece for people. And I don't believe everything I read about this person was offered that. A lot of that kind of gets, you got to be really careful what you do, what you listen to. But we do know that there's relatively mass confusion of what is acceptable. We know what's acceptable, and that's what we're focused on. So other people are going to do what they do, but we're going to do it the way that we think Dayton should do it.
Trying to understand name, image, and likeness, and obviously in that discussion, a lot of pushback. There have been some that even say this is not good for collegiate athletics, and strong in saying that we're not going to support that. From those fans, from those opinions, what's your response?
I think it's a great observation, and I'll never tell anyone how to spend their money, right? I mean, consumers can decide what they want to support and what they don't, and that's how our economic system works. And so I'll never tell anybody what to do specifically with their money. However, if they care about Dayton basketball, and frankly our other sports, but if they care about Dayton basketball, they're gonna eventually have to come around to that. This is what it is now. This is the future. If you were to go back into the 1940s, athletic scholarships weren't even a thing in the NCAA. In fact, in the late 40s, the NCAA had to adopt what they called a sanity code. I believe it was in 1948, to try to bring some regulation. And at that time, they said, you're able to offer tuition. And then in the 50s, they added tuition fees, room and board. And there were people that said, you can't do that. That jeopardizes the academic, it jeopardizes the academy, it jeopardizes what college sports is all about. But the reality is, if you care about Dayton basketball, it's not a sufficient answer for us to say, well, we don't want to participate in that, if you want Dayton basketball to advance in the NCAA tournament and compete for championships. If we don't, then that's a different conversation. So I understand that pushback. There's been an evolution for me. We're very much focused on academics. We believe that a scholarship is an incredibly valuable weapon for young people for life. And we're not necessarily, I wasn't thrilled to enter this environment, but we have to enter it if we care about Dayton basketball, and there's just no alternative.
And sort of a follow-up, and now I'll direct it to Matt. Some might say, okay, Dayton sells out every home game, yeah. and I don't need to be a part of that, or NIL is just maybe for the big booster or that big money check. What are your thoughts on that opinion and sort of what Neil said of having to jump into this world?
Yeah, I think the flip side of that question is one that I get asked fairly regularly, and that is, with support to Dayton6th, does that mean we're going to be able to do X, whatever X is? And my immediate response is, I can't deal in hypotheticals. I can't predict the future. But I know what's going to happen if we do nothing. And that's not something that we, as fans, are going to like. We're not going to be able to compete at the highest level. And in a new NIL world, it is part of the game. I think it's important to also remember that we, Dayton basketball, have competed at the highest level. We're only a few seasons removed, from National Player of the Year, National Coach of the Year, what was likely a #1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That was all pre-NIL. And if we do nothing, that won't be possible. And I can guarantee that.
Yeah, and that goes kind of back to the component of it is imagine trying to advance in the NCAA tournament and win championships and be, I make no bones about that. We want to be a Final Four capable team. When we get there and how we get there, anyone's guess, but that's what we talk about. We want to be a Final Four capable team. I've never said, we're going to a Final Four in this year, but that's what inside these walls, we talk about being a Final Four capable team. And if you were to kind of take name, image, likeness and say, well, what if we said 50 years ago, we don't really like the idea of athletic scholarships? Would Dayton have had its run in the 60s? Would we have gone to the Elite Eight in the 80s? Would we have gone to Elite Eight in 2014? Would we be a #1 seed in 2019? Would we have Obi Toppin? Would we have Deron Holmes without scholarships? The answer would be no. The answer would be no. And there are some exceptions in the end. The Ivy League has great basketball. I'm not picking on the Ivy League. I've got a ton of respect for them. But the reality is that is an investment component that was required to that. There was a time where Major League Baseball and Curt Flood, and you go back to that, people didn't like the concept of free agency. And if you didn't like the concept of free agency in the pros right now, you're unlikely a World Series contender. And you can hold that principle if you want to, but you're unlikely to be successful. So I view my job as the steward of a valuable asset in this community as the leader to say, hey, tell us what's going on. Tell us what you think we have to do to be successful. And I have no choice but to say, well, all the things that we all do, the giving, the seating plan, all that stuff that funds the machine that we have. And now there's another piece to it. And we can't run from the fact that there's another piece to it. And I think that where that leads us, anyone's guess, because other schools are doing this too. So, if we invest in NIL, I can guarantee you Ohio State's investing in NIL. And I've had people say, look at all the money you charge in season tickets. Why do we have to do that? I said, Ohio State is being very aggressive with NIL. Look at Texas. Look at Southern Cal. Look at Kentucky. They got, their athletic department revenues are over $200 million, right? I'm less than 40 million. So I can guarantee you if they need NIL, I can guarantee you we need NIL.
Well, and that's a really interesting point because as an outsider, I have an understanding of name, image, and likeness, but we're all still learning. And one of the most shocking parts of this ride was Ohio State asking for coin amongst their donors, and that's something that in my lifetime I've never seen.
And we're unable. There's not one nickel from our athletic department that can pay a player above NCAA permissible expenses. So only the third parties can do that. So we could have a $200 million budget, just like Ohio State or whatever school you want to pick, and we still can't pay the NIL. So the reality is that the way the rules are currently written, we cannot pay it. Matt's organization has a partnership with us that he's able to advertise in our arena. He pays for that. He pays market rate for his advertising. So if you see a Dayton6th ad in the arena, he gets an invoice for that. I can't even offer that up for free to say, hey, can you do this? If Matt were hosting people in a suite, he's paying for that suite to do that. And so I think that's part of the education is that the schools are currently unable to do that. We can support, we can go visit with donors, we can visit with corporations, we can do things like this. We can encourage, we can educate, we can facilitate, but we are unable to pay. Only the third parties can do that, and they have to do it for a reasonable economic exchange, which many companies in town have. And I think that's maybe at least a little bit of a segue for me to make sure that I'm describing what I see lying ahead as the challenges, but I don't want to be lost on what has happened so far, which has been amazing and been wonderful. What White Allen and Tim White Jr. have done with Deron. We've got Lee's Chicken. We have Henny Penny involved, Premier Health. I don't want to list them all because I'll forget some. But our community has really done well. And we've done things that are, I think, best in class, frankly. But we want to be elite. And so part of that thinking of what goes into their mind, of what they decide to do, is, hey, what are my opportunities at Dayton in the community? I just visited with Brian Roberts. He was at the Davidson game in Charlotte. And he comes back to Dayton and he's looking to invest in real estate here. You know, he's got, like, this is a lifelong relationship that our players can build that kind of can start with NIL. You know, I was at the Fordham game with Obi, and he comes back to Dayton 2 or 3 times a year. He's talked about this is like his second home and how he could invest in here. So we take NIL in business relationships now and try to take a 30-year view to it. Now imagine me sitting, you know, in my office with our coaches and with a young transfer or a young recruit to say, hey, how do you guys do NIL? And I say, well, let me tell you how our community does NIL. I can't necessarily do it, but let me tell you how our community does it. And we turn that into a 30-year story. That's a really compelling. The late friend of ours, George Jenke, that passed earlier a few months ago, who was on the Dayton6th board, came here, and then he built his life here. The University of Dayton changed his life. And when he saw that, that's when he chose to become part of Dayton6th, because he spent the rest of his career here. You know, he came here as a student and never left. And that's what we want from our student athletes, and NIL is going to be a critical component of that, because it's the new scholarship. It's what scholarships was in the 40s or 50s, maybe even more.
Can I just foot stomp something that Neil said? We have had a ton of success. Individuals, big businesses who are corporate partners in the arena, small businesses who are corporate partners in the arena, and big businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurs who don't have direct university affiliation. All of them have supported NIL. And to me, that's where I go back to the best thing about NIL is the ability to connect our student athletes to this community in unique ways. And we have had great success from companies of all sizes. I do also just want to reemphasize, you know, that long-term commitment from student athletes, whether, you know, Neil talked deeply about George. We've talked about Brian Roberts several times, Keith Walskowski also on our advisory board, and the impact of him being, you know, growing up in this community, playing college athletics here, leaving to go have a remarkable professional career in Europe, to come back and continue to invest in our community, to invest in our student athletes. That is that long-term commitment to being part of the Dayton basketball family.
You talked about Keith's career overseas. I do find this so interesting because here at the University of Dayton, there's so many international student athletes. And if you could, just talk about that component, because there's changes there and how it impacts a visa, immigration. And I find that where, you know, obviously we're learning a lot about name, image, and likeness, but that's a whole other piece that I think a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll simplify it as easy as I can. Our students are here on F1 student visa, and essentially that's a visa that allows them to be a student, not an employee. So work visas are governed under different regulations of U.S. Customs laws. And so they're here on work visas, which means they're unable to be employees. And they can really only earn what's called passive income. Maybe they own an apartment complex that they rent out or something like that. So they can't actually earn like W-2, 1099 type income unless there's some very narrowly defined criteria that they meet. And certainly we would never want to jeopardize the visa status of any of our student athletes, with customs, because for obvious reasons that would be a problem. So what we've really focused on is creative solutions. When they are outside the country, they are fully eligible for NIL. They could literally be 6 inches into Canada, and they can do an NIL deal. So we were able to take advantage of that when we were in the Bahamas in November. Our basketball team is scheduled for a foreign tour this summer where we can do that. But the average person wouldn't really know how to navigate that. And that's where places like G3 Marketing, places like Dayton6th, and other organizations can say, look, I do understand that. We've got the attorneys that have figured that all out. Just pull your funds with us, and we'll take care of what goes on in the Bahamas. We'll take care of what goes on over in France and Italy in the summer to do that. And so that's part of the strategy of the NIL folks from an international perspective, that they can do that. Now they can do some jersey things that are passive income, and there's some opportunities for them. But our roster, not necessarily intentionally, but our roster is heavy international, and so we've got to be a leader in that space. And in my opinion, the best way to do that is hard for a lot of individuals to understand all the immigration things and how would I issue and how would I deduct this expense. But that's where organizations that we partner with, in addition to Matt, like I said, pro camps in G3 are able to do that. They've got it set up, and they can just be the common source of funds to be able to make sure that Tamani Kamara or Kobe Elvis or Mustafa or Richard would be able to participate in NIL, because it's been hard for them to watch their teammates do things, and they volunteered to be part of it and do that. But it's a critical component for us. But I think the expertise of people that our fans don't have to figure that out. They can rely, and if they support Dayton6th or any other organization, that organization can figure out how to support the international student athletes in the right way. It's very hard for everyone to do that on their own unless they're out of the country.
Yeah, I think, Neil, to add on to that, I think, for the fans to know, the first 5 NIL contracts issued by Dayton6th were to the one foreign student athlete on the women's basketball team and the 4 men's basketball players. Those were our first 5 contracts issued when the student athletes were in the Bahamas. They signed autographs, they did fan engagement opportunities down there, they did meet and greets. That was the first step because we knew it was important. In fact, as we launched Dayton6th, conversations with the entire men's basketball roster were very much around, because we're moving on this quickly so that your teammates can participate in 4 weeks. And our student athletes, our men's basketball student athletes and women's basketball student athletes have volunteered their time in support of the domestic student athletes for some of their initiatives in NIL so that it could be a full team engagement. And we found ways to ensure that they can be compensated legally and efficiently where they're able to earn to not jeopardize their F1 status.
Gentlemen, I really appreciate your time, and we covered a lot today. But before we close, Neil, is there anything else that we should throw out there that we haven't mentioned about name, image, and likeness?
No, I think we've covered it. I think this has been. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. I think the one thing that I would leave people with is that there has to be a certain level of trust, I guess, with me or with people like Matt and with our coaching staff to say, like, we're on the inside. We see what's going on in the business, and I'm here to tell you that name, image, likeness is important. It is an important piece of the puzzle for us to be a nationally competitive program. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say it directly, I didn't say it honestly, and really from the heart, that even though change is tough, there's some reluctance to do that. And that's why if someone's reluctant and they're not quite sure, just buy a couple tickets then. No, you don't need to, no one's asking you to drop off 6 figures, just participate to the level that you're comfortable with. And I would be remiss for us not to be in the mix with players and not to be in the mix with the caliber of players that we want to advance us. And someone say, well, the university never really told me how important it was. I'm here to tell you that it's important, and it's here to stay. And we're going to try to do it in a way that is a way the class that our fans expect us to do things is the way that we intend to do it. And that's my commitment to our alums. That's my commitment to our fan base. But what's not an option is to just say, we're just completely not interested. That won't work for our basketball team to remain in the national conversation.
Neil, thank you. Matt, really appreciate your time. And for more information, I know that we're all still trying to learn, but you can find it at the bottom of your screen. And like always, we appreciate your support on the University of Dayton, and go Flyers.